welcome to Saturday Night at the Movies, the podcast that celebrates classic, cult, and current films and the people that made them, and many other aspects of pop culture. I'm your host, Steve Rubin. Our producer is Ben Shrewsbury, and our signature theme was composed by Greg Lerhoff. Here it's always Saturday night, and our mission is to chronicle film and pop cultural history one memory at a time. Tonight, we are honored to have author, novelist, and film historian Bob Herzberg as our guest, a truly eclectic chronicler of American pop culture. Some of his books include Savages and Saints, The Changing Image of the American Indian in Westerns, Revolutionary Mexico on Screen, A Critical History 1914 to 2014, The FBI and the Movies, and Hollywood and the Military Bureaucracy. We're going to talk a lot about Hollywood's war movies as well as some other subjects. Welcome, Bob.
Hey, it's great to be here, Steve.
So tell me, I always start my conversation this way. When you were a little kid, what was your movie theater of choice? Where did you go see your first movies?
My first movies were, I would say, at the Carroll Theater, the Carroll Movie House, which was on Crown Street and Utica Avenue in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. I was taken to that religion today, Rose Schlossberg. But even before that, we were talking about military films or war films. First movie theater I was absolutely in. I can't say I saw the whole film, but the first one I was absolutely in was from where the neighborhood I was born in, the Brownsville section of Brooklyn. It seems my mom, Helen Herzberg, had to talk to my father, Harry. But Harry was doing, my dad, Harry, was in the Sutter Movie House, which was on Sutter Avenue and Ralph Avenue in Brownsville. And he was watching a war picture of some kind. I believe it was a POW movie. And so you could do this in those days. My mom said to me and my big sister Rose, go get dad. We went over to the movie theater. Rose is saying to the lady at the counter, we have to, lady at the admission booth, we have to see my dad. We're not here to see the movie. We have to see my dad. So we went in there. It was like, at the time, 50 cents for adults, 25 cents for kids. But she was very nice. They would not have done that today, where especially the admission is like $20, 16.
We've come a long way.
Like, no, I'm not letting you go in there. Yeah. But anyway, so we went in there to see my dad, who was in the middle of the center, like towards the front aisles. And I'm looking up on screen. My sister and my father exchanged information. I'm looking up on screen, and there is a bunch of POWs, American POWs in a German POW camp. And the thing is, I remember there was a comedy moment where somebody gets pushed and falls down, and the American and all the Allies, prisoners laugh or something like that.
Well, I'm going to stop you right there because it sounds like you're talking about Stalag 17, the Billy Wilder movie.
It couldn't be because I doubt it. I don't know what the name of the picture was.
Okay.
I mean, it was released at a time even before The Great Escape, but after Stalag 17. We're talking about 1960, 61.
Oh, okay.
So that I was like, 3 years old at the time. It was 1959, really. So I don't know what the movie is, but I remember there was a French guy with a beret, and you had representative Allied soldiers all over the place. The British guy, with his headgear. But it was odd. So they let us in to do that. I saw all this is very interesting. Of course, this is quite different than the next experience I had in a movie theater, which was Lois Pitkin, where this time my dad, Harry, the same guy who was my dad took me and Rose to a Jerry Lewis movie at the Lois Pitkin on Pitkin Avenue off Grafton Legion Street, I believe. They tried to have a mall recently. It didn't quite work out. But anyway, we went in there, and you take a look at the Technicolor of the day. which was, we're talking 1959 maybe. And I saw it, and I liked Jerry Lewis on TV. I saw Jerry Lewis, Abbott and Costello. My exposure to all these guys was on TV. I went into the Loews Pitkin. This was in the wintertime. I went in there and I saw Jerry Lewis in that unrealistic, weird color of the time. And he's about 150 feet tall. And I looked at that and I looked at him and I was horrified. I can't explain it. I was horrified. It was some point 1959, 1960, and I fled the theater screaming and ran out into the street past my dad, my sister Rose, ran out there and almost got hit by B14, the Pitkin Avenue bus. I fortunately jumped into a snowdrift nearby. And it was just, that was my first experience going to a theater and actually trying to see something over there. Well, according to my father was pissed off. He was get that little son of a bitch out of here. I am not taking him to a theater again, and it was,
Well,
that.
I have to tell you that as I've told the listeners and viewers many times, I grew up across the street from a movie theater in Los Angeles. I lived right near the Fox West Coast Stadium off of Pico Boulevard, and this was in the late 50s, and my friends all wanted to see horror movies, and I could not take horror movies. I was a sheltered only child. I would sit there for 2 minutes, and the minute anything spooked, I ran into the lobby. I spent most of my time in the lobby. I did embrace science fiction movies. They would run them back and forth, horror one week, science fiction the next. So I gradually built up some courage. But really gruesome horror gave me nightmares, definitely nightmares. It's funny, I was just reading about our new 10th planet in our solar system, and they've given it the name Eris. And I remember one of the movies that scared the living crap out of me was a movie called The Brain from the Planet Eris, which starred John Agar, who had left the John Ford Westerns and had started doing B horror movies. I, I think after he divorced Shirley Temple, I think his career went into the caverns.
Well,
But
yes, he was a drunk. He drank a great deal, and that Sabbath he was an angry drunk, and that he was. That's one of the reasons Shirley divorced him, and it after a while, Universal International cut him loose. He's working for Independent United Artists, and before you know it, he's doing something like Women of the Prehistoric Planet by 1967, and it was downhill all the way until he quit booze.
yeah, when I worked at Showtime in the 90s, he came over to do a John Carpenter kind of anthology movie called Body Bag. So I got a chance to spend a little time with Mr. Agar, and he was very nice. I sat down with him. We had a video press kit crew on the set that day. I asked them if they give me 5 minutes. So I sat down with him and talked a little bit about the John Ford Westerns, which of course was my favorite of his. Absolutely. It's funny you're talking about running in to see your dad in the movie theaters. It reminds me of the day my wife was giving birth to our first child,
Mhm.
and we had been told by the nurse that it was going to take a while. So we sent my mother-in-law and my her boyfriend to the movies, and I sat on the couch. The nurse comes in 5 minutes later and says, "The baby's coming. You better get them." So I literally had to run out of the hospital, Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, race across the street to the movie theater in the Beverly Center, and my mother-in-law and her boyfriend were watching Clueless, the Alicia Silverstone movie, and
Oh,
it was a pretty full theater. And fortunately, my her boyfriend he was a very tall man with his white hair, and I could spot him in a second. We grabbed her, we ran across the street, got to the birthing suite, and my daughter came about 3 minutes later. I could have missed the whole birth. It's pretty crazy. So I studied history in school. That got my passion for history going. Was that also your experience? Did you or were you a history buff?
I kind of leaned into that naturally. You see, both my parents were Holocaust survivors, and my father was Auschwitz, and my mom it was Mildorf in Romania. And my father was a very loyal news watcher and news reader of the newspapers and what have you of the times. And I kind of, and we talked history, and I, most kids of the day went into comic books and action stuff and all that stuff, and averages for ball players, and I was very much into talking about war-torn Europe and American history and the Middle East and things like that. And I was reading the papers before I was a teenager. I was studying, and that.
So
So
your father was comfortable talking about his concentration camp experience?
yes, it was a hell of it. My father more than my mother, I would say. But my mother was kind of out in the open also. But my mother had already, in a way, suffered more in a way, and my father was very articulate about it, and he told me things here and there. He tried with a fellow prisoner to try to break out of the slave labor camps over there at the time. He saw a friend of his like shotgunned right during the chase. It was that alone could have made movies, but
Did he actually escape from Auschwitz, or was he
no,
survived there?
no, they captured him again. They captured him. They pulled him back with another guy they captured, and as discipline that the SS had, they used him as an example. They set him out in front of everybody else and whipped them.
Oh God.
And my father collapsed after the third strike. And so he always, I mean, you had um, you had the dentist there, like Mengele. I don't think my father ever met Mengele, but the dentist would yank it. My father had that. They yanked all his teeth out. They yanked all the teeth out of prisoners looking for gold or what have you, yanked out. My father had false teeth for the rest of his life. Beautiful smile, which weren't his original teeth. And my mother always had this problem, numbers, always for the rest of their lives. And, there's just so much to say about that.
There was a
But
long period where people just didn't talk about it. My parents were not Holocaust survivors. They were born in the U.S. Um, I remember, well, for me, World War II began with the movies. I mean, while I was watching those science fiction movies, World War II was all over the television. Movies like Battleground, A Walk in the Sun, 12 O'Clock High. And then I think probably the first World War II movie I saw in the theaters of note was Bridge on the River Kwai in '57. And I think that movie had a terrific impact on me. That was big and in color. It was an epic movie, an exciting movie. And I think that I think it's pointed out, by the way, that this was one of the first movies that really took advantage of shooting on location. Wasn't a soundstage movie like Battleground, where they filmed the Ardennes forest, on an MGM soundstage. Do you remember Quai? Do you remember seeing it in the theaters?
I didn't know. I was too young to see. Well, I wouldn't have enjoyed it being 3 or 4 years old, but as it is, I had seen it, of course, on TV. I had to view it again for the research for Imperial Japan on screen. I
Right,
mean, it's a lot to see, a lot of the background there. I mean, first of all, I was shot, I believe, in Ceylon,
right.
and I don't think the original place where they had that would have given permission to shoot it there. And then Ceylon, the government of Ceylon was it was much better place to shoot it. They had permission. Da, da, da. I mean, the background is just incredible.
Oh
First
yeah.
of all, you mentioned the sci-fi's, and sci-fi owes a lot of its success to World War II. Sci-fi was there was sci-fi before World War II, but after the war, there was a little delayed reaction, and then by the late 40s, and then by the 1950s, wham, science fiction all over the place because it owed a lot to the military film, to World War II. The inventions coming World War II, the ways of fighting, the command structure of all these countries, everything owes sci-fi owes a lot to that whole thing, what happened in real life.
Do you talk about
Um,
that in your book, Hollywood and the Military Bureaucracy? Do you talk about the influence of science fiction films on World War II films?
mm, well, more likely the influence of what happened off screen of the military on the sci-fi film, but the sci-fi film also, by the 1950s, there would be a change in how to tackle the monster. In the horror films, let's take out the cross, let's take out the holy water, let's take out the silver bullets, blah, 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 blah. All Eastern European legends, for the most part, Eastern European legends. But later on, with the sci-fi film of the 50s, we had seen what the men of the American military could do. How to destroy the creatures, call out the army. War of the Worlds has that. The Man from Planet X, which is a budget sci-fi by Edward Ulmer, has this, has the same thing. Call out the military. The Thing, Howard Hawks' The Thing. I give credit to his editor, but it's Howard Hawks' The Thing. Get out the military. This happens in a military environment in the North Pole. So the military is there to stop the problem, and they do it. It's 1950s, no twist endings. They do it. They mow down the creature with bullets. They use the atom bomb, although the atom bomb is ineffective in War of the Worlds. But
I'm always reminded of the opening of The Day the Earth Stood Still, which was always one of my favorite, where the army shows up in the mall, to face off Klaatu and the Silver Robot. And the Silver Robot comes down the plank, and he's surrounded by tanks, machine guns, artillery, and they don't fire. Actually, one guy fires a shot which wounds Klaatu, and then Gort basically melts everything. But I always remember I saw that in the Stadium Theater as a little kid, and I was riveted to the screen. That was one of those movies I didn't run to the lobby and see it. But I agree with you. The military element in the science fiction films was big. Also, the influence of the atomic bomb had a strong effect on movies. I had a chance to interview Ted Scherdeman, who wrote the screenplay for the movie Them in
yeah.
1954 about the giant ants in the New Mexico desert. And he told me how important it was to say something against the bomb. He was a lieutenant colonel in the army in the Philippines. And when he heard the news that they had dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, he sat down in the gutter and vomited his breakfast. It was that horrifying for him to think of that. And then of course you talk about Japan, the atom bomb affected all of those Godzilla movies.
Godzilla has a lot to thank for the atom bomb for because Godzilla is a film made by the losers, let's say, of World War II. The Japanese over there, unfortunately, for the longest time, the Japanese, and to a certain degree, I think to this very day, the Japanese political military structure is kind of not apologized for what they did during World War II, and their educational system reflected that for the longest time. There were differences in phrasing. A sneak attack on Pearl Harbor became combat operations. There were a lot of Japanese activists who tried to fight the educational system, and the very fact that up to the prime minister, they would not apologize. So by the 1950s, a mere 10 years or so, less than 10 years after the end of the war, what you are going to get is a Japanese film called Gojira, made in 1954, which basically alluded to Americans are at fault. This is based, Gojira, believe it or not, Godzilla, based on a real incident. Not that we did revive a dinosaur. What happened was there was a trawler, a fishing trawler, that was out very close to Bikini Atoll over there. I think, or it was Atoll Bravo, and not very far. I think about 14 miles away. They set off the atom bomb, the American military, and what happened were these the people on that trawler, the men of that trawler who were just trying to get fish, well, they were all affected. Hair fell out, atomic dust was going in their eyeballs, their noses, everything else. Quite a few of them died younger of some cancer or something like that. Believe it or not, a few of them didn't die early, and at least one of them went into his early 90s. Nevertheless, the Eisenhower administration at the time granted, a huge stipend to them, to the families of what was happening, which was quite different than what the Japanese government did to the victims of their germ warfare program in China and in other locales. They did not grant stipends, nor did they ever admit any wrongdoing, but that's another story. Nevertheless, when you see Godzilla on screen, he's basically a walking dinosaur version of atomic guilt.
Mm.
It was to indict the Americans. So needless to say, what happened was when we imported it, it was made, go here, it made in 1954. When we imported it by 1956, I believe, what we did is we had an American B film director, I believe it was Terry Morse, and he was an editor also. So what he did was, what they had him do, because believe me, the military oversaw a film like that. The American military knew if you're going to import something like that, let's look at it. They looked at it, boom, boom, slice, slice, slice. Certain things, certain remarks, certain allusions to the atomic bomb. Oh, one Japanese character, and go here would go, with this Japanese woman would go, oh, first Hiroshima, then this, the March of Godzilla. And so it was weird. A woman in the Japanese diet would complain about atomic fallout, all sorts of stuff. So what happened was slice, 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 cut out. And they would edit in Raymond Burr. Raymond Burr as a reporter.
Ray Burr as the correspondent looking outside his window, all shot.
Exactly. He's looking outside his window, which happens to be another film. And he's looking at, Honda's, go here while he's talking about this. And very well edited. You wouldn't know it unless you're looking for this and oh, now I see. This is, edited.
Bob, did you ever read anything about how the reaction was to from the Japanese to the American version of Godzilla? Do you know if anybody had a squawk about that? I'm sure there was a little bit of squawking, I would think.
I would say the Japanese version, they were probably, from what I gathered, didn't care that much. Why? Because look at what happened afterwards. Godzilla was there. Go became Godzilla. Then you had Mothra. Then you had Rodan. Then with barely an allusion to the Japanese bomb, to the atom bomb that I've seen, or anybody else has for that matter. What they did is Toho begat an industry, a multi-million-dollar industry of giant monsters marching through there. Let's have a guy in a costume, a Godzilla costume, what have you, just march through that doll set and let the Tonka toys coming through. It's supposed to be the Japanese military fighting them. And it was a multi-million, maybe billion-dollar industry. That's what they thought of. And the Japanese filmmaker got the idea. This is what they'll accept. This is what the world will accept right now. And that's fine with us. It makes money for us, blah, blah, blah. There's no Japanese war guilt in any of these films.
One of those movies played down the street from at another theater as a kid called The Mysterians, which wasn't a giant monster movie. It was a science fiction movie. And I'll tell you, the line around the block in 1959 or 60 to see The Mysterians was pretty incredible. I'm going to put up, you gave me a list of your favorite World War II movies. I am going to put up one right now, and we'll talk a little bit about it. Speaking of Japan, this is a movie called Bataan from 1942. It's also a personal favorite of mine with a great cast. You've got Robert Taylor, Desi Arnaz, Lloyd Nolan, Robert Walker Jr. No, not Robert Walker Jr., Robert Walker Sr., Thomas Mitchell. I think George Murphy is in it too.
Right. Lloyd
Tell me,
Nolan, no, not Preston Foster. Lee Bowman is the man in the top and the center.
there
I
you
see his
go. Tell me why you picked this picture.
is your nest. Um, because there's so much garbage behind it, basically. And I say garbage in a way that there's a lot of the real history is part tragedy, part military snafu. Let's put it this way: the way Douglas MacArthur, General Douglas MacArthur, was in charge over there of the Philippines. Now, before the Japanese attacked, he was trying to make the Philippine army into a fightable, a fighting army. But they figured that that would occur when they were a full-fledged military unit by 1946. Well, of course, the Japanese weren't going to give them that chance. So the Japanese were going crazy in the South Pacific. They were just rampaging. So when they attacked suddenly after Pearl Harbor, you see, Douglas MacArthur didn't think Pearl Harbor was going to happen. That is in Army memos that they have to this day. He would deny that later on that, oh no, I knew Pearl Harbor was going to happen. No, he didn't. He shrugged it off. So what happened is they attacked Pearl Harbor. Then, right after that, they flew to the Philippines and attacked Clark Field down there. What MacArthur did and what his military did is they had the planes all together, wingtip to wingtip on the tarmac, easy targets for the Japanese. They thought, let's have them together because that way the saboteurs wouldn't get to them. Well, they didn't have to worry about saboteurs because the Japanese Navy itself was bombing them. They were just very easy. He made it very easy. George,
The same thing happened at Pearl Harbor. All of our planes at Hickam Field and Wheeler were all lined up as perfect targets.
because Walter Short, who was head of the Army on the Hawaiian Department at the time, and the CNI, Commander of Naval Operations, who was Harold Stark. And they felt their big problem was saboteurs. Sabotage, that's it. We'll get the planes all together and Well, we see what happened with that one. They just didn't think anybody was actually going to be that brazen. And the Japanese took advantage of that because they were brazen. And they figured the Americans figured that no one's going to be that brazen. Who's going to do something like that? FDR and his staff said right off the bat, oh, they might attack the Philippines. They might attack somewhere else, New Guinea, Guam, or something like that. The Dutch West Indies, or the Dutch had at the time, to get that oil and tin. They didn't expect Pearl Harbor. They didn't expect anything so close to home. What the military did at the time of Bataan is they wanted MacArthur out of there. They wanted him gone. If he were captured by the Japanese, then the Japanese weren't going to kill him. They were going to parade him around Japan. They're going to parade him around Tokyo. And what a propaganda thing. That would break the hearts of the Americans right off the bat. MacArthur was a hero, major commander over there. They said to MacArthur, leave, get out. And so, against his will, because I believe he would have stayed, but he seemed to have no problem. He had to leave, his family, his wife, his son, Arthur. They had to leave on a PT boat. Unfortunately, the soldiers of Bataan did not have that privilege. And as they called themselves, the fighting orphans of Bataan, no, the fighting bastards of Bataan, I believe. What was the fighting orphans? No mother, no father, no Uncle Sam. And so a lot of them were angry. You do not see that in Bataan, much less Return to the Bataan, but the Bataan sequel.
Well, I guess you could say that Bataan, given that it was released shortly after the fall of Bataan, was a pure American propaganda film to encourage people about even though we lost that battle, we went down swinging, and wait till you see the 140 million of us who are going to fight back.
Yes, yes. I do like that ending when Rob Taylor is firing that machine gun at him. If you take a very close look at him, and I mentioned this in the book, his lips are moving as his loud gunfire. He actually mouths the words, come and get it. He says either you bastards or you sons of bitches. Either one, he's saying a nasty thing, mouthing it. He's mouthing it. And it's a hell of an ending, but he loses. He
Right.
dies. They're going to overrun him right off the bat.
One of the things I have to say about Bataan, by the way, and it's stark black and white film. There's a lot of atmosphere in those that jungle atmosphere of a small unit of men holding this little position against the Japanese. And I always I find it interesting that the Japanese have them outnumbered 20 to 1, but they only attack in three-man waves. So they just kill everybody in these three-man waves. But to this day, it is an interesting a bit of an artifact. But thank you for that little interest in the. I'm going to put up another film, which is much later of a different type, which you chose Attack, the
Oh
Jack
my God,
Palance
yeah.
picture. And I just recently watched that picture. And this is a 50s World War II movie, a very gritty movie.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. First of all, by the mid 1950s, the with the breakup of the production code 1953 under the very narrow-minded Joseph Breen, and they broke it up. And the thing is now they were starting to show pictures that were more controversial. Robert Aldrich, not my favorite person, but as I'm sure a lot of actors didn't like him either. But as it is, he was a rebel, partially for the reason that as a filmmaker, as someone coming up in Hollywood, he basically learned at the feet of many communist directors. Joseph Losey, Abraham Polonsky, he was the AD for Chaplin, though Chaplin was no communist, but still he was a sympathizer. But anyway, left of center people. So he grew up with this sensibility of being anti-authority, being anti-military was no problem for Robert Aldrich. So what he made was a film that attacks not the soldier on the battlefield. God bless him, he didn't do that. But he attacked the brass, the military brass. Attack is that kind of a film. He would always say later on, he bragged, Robert Aldrich, in interviews, that Attack is an anti-war film, should be compared with All Quiet on the Western Front. No, it's not an anti-war film. It's anti-military brass, if you take a real look at it. Eddie Albert plays a cowardly, drunken, malingering commander of an army unit in a Nazi-occupied Europe over the Nazi, a town fighting the Nazis over there. And he just can't send help to a beleaguered unit. He won't do it. He's drunk. He won't take responsibility. He's a coward. Of course, he's big and bad when the shoe is on the other foot, and he's like tries to bully others around. An ironic counterpoint, because Eddie Albert was a war hero. Eddie Albert won the Bronze Star. He was with the Navy. He saved 70. He and others, especially he, was charged of a landing craft that saved, beleaguered Marines who were out there, I believe, in Tarara, and he saved them. He helped save them. He got the Bronze Star later on, and he was such a noble man. Let's put it this way: a lot of war heroes are. They don't talk about it. You couldn't get it out of Eddie Albert. He never said anything about it, hardly. So that's the kind of guy he was. You take a look at Attack, you have war veterans in the film. You have Jack Palance, the name right behind it, Eddie Albert. You have Jack Palance. Lee Marvin was a war hero at Saipan, if I'm pronouncing that right. He got wounded there.
I know Saipan well because I did a documentary about the life of Guy Gabaldon, who was the actor who was in Hell to Eternity, played by Jeffrey Hunter. I'll tell you about that.
Ah, yeah, I write about him in Imperial Japan on screen.
That was one of the first movies, by the way, Hell to Eternity. And by the way, for the listeners and viewers, this is not From Here to Eternity, which it's often confused with title-wise.
Yeah.
Hell to Eternity is the story of Guy Gabaldon, who was an American of Hispanic descent, who was somewhat raised by Japanese Americans. The movie portrays him as an orphan, but he's not. But he went to Saipan. He spent most of his early life in East Los Angeles, uh, interacting with Japanese Americans. They were very close to him. So when he goes to Saipan as a Marine, he knows some Japanese lingo. And Guy Gabaldon is officially credited with single-handedly capturing over 1,100 Japanese. It's one of the great stories. But that when I saw the movie, it was the very first time I saw Japanese portrayed as human beings, as opposed to the type in Bataan or Guadalcanal Diary, where they usually had buck teeth and they were pretty
That
much.
was during the war.
That
War
was during the
hatreds
war.
were high.
Exactly, exactly. I'm going to put
After
up
the war
another
was
picture.
different.
I'm going to put up another picture of my. You chose another one of my favorites, which is Fred Zinnemann's From Here
Eternity.
to Eternity, which is his From Here to Eternity, not Hell to Eternity. I I love this movie. I've probably seen it 80 times. It never
Wonderful
grows old. I
picture.
know that it was very much a soft version of James Jones's rather searing book. I mean, the New Congress Club in the movie is a social club, but obviously in the book it is a house of prostitution. What do you how do you feel about this movie?
I love it. It's great. Harry Cohn, God bless, I guess God damn him for some things, God bless him for others. But he had the courage, and even Daniel Mainwaring, the screenwriter who never liked him, says the same thing. He had the courage, the guts to go with this movie. But of course, not only did we have to worry about the dying brain office as much, but the military. There is an office within an army. The army had an office for, of course, their portrayal in films. Donald Baruch was the head of that office, and he was a real army brass hat, thick-headed, all prestige for the military guy. You always got to think of the American military in those terms, especially at the time. The Army and all of the services should be credited with incredible heroism. And also, they're also thinking of a prestige. From Here to Eternity is a good example of that. They didn't like the book. They didn't like the movie. They didn't like Cane Mutiny either. And the thing is, the Baruch complained bitterly about Aldrich's attack. The correspondence is nasty and sarcastic and all this other stuff between Aldrich and Baruch. But the thing is, with From Here to Eternity, James Jones was a war hero himself. He was at Guadalcanal. He did all this stuff. And the thing is that they watered down considerably. In the film, Deborah Kerr's character, Karen, the wife of the military officer, the thick-headed captain, and supposedly in the book, she got the clap from the captain. Well, they're not going to have that in an American film. Um, I mean, the thing about Fatso's little stockade over there would make the SS proud. You're not going to see that in the film either, but it's heavily implied. This guy uses his truncheon to beat up people a hell of a lot. There are gay implications From Here to Eternity as well. Maggio supposedly, and one how Sinatra would have taken this one. Maggio sometimes went out with gay prostitutes, and or pretended, or he was prostitute for gays at the time, and there were gay activities within the platoon itself. There were army.
It's a miracle. It's a miracle this movie ever got made, considering how it did. Yeah, I guess you have to give the credit to Teradash, who wrote it, and
Haradash, not Mainwaring. I'm sorry, he did other screenplays. I'm sorry.
Teradash. No, no, absolutely. I actually I didn't. I talked to Fred Zinnemann in London back in '74, and he told me some of this stuff, but the characterizations were just beautiful. One of my favorite. I mean, obviously, the movie is Montgomery Clift's movie. I think the reason he didn't win the Oscar that year is I think they also nominated Burt Lancaster for Best Actor. So I think the two of them split the vote so that William Holden could win for Stalag 17. But I
Yeah.
thought Monty's performance was just marvelous. And Lancaster, the epitome. I mean, the Army should have been very proud of Lancaster because he was just a perfect, as one of the performers said, he's the best soldier he had ever seen. I think the actor who tells him that is, or one of the actors. I know that George Reeves had a prominent role in the original movie. I think he played the cook Stark, Sergeant Stark, but I guess in the early previews, he had become, as you know, very well known from the Superman television series. And every time George Reeves was seen on screen, there was a titter in the audience. So they cut his part down to the bone.
Yeah. What they did is a lot of people wondered what was Superman doing in the army, basically, because by that time he was getting to be world famous. George Reeves from that wonderful show we all saw as children. And the thing is, and Reeves made the show and made his fame forever for that.
Well, you talk,
Unfortunately, the casting choices at the time were pretty limited. I think they saw a guy do a successful TV show and he's playing Superman and all that. And this is the way the audience reacts. A preview, slice, slice, slice. You still see him in the film,
oh
but
no,
he's not as, he had a bigger part for that.
oh sure.
I mean, we're a man who worked for Fritz Lang and didn't end up shooting Fritz Lang. Let's put it this way: they apparently got along, which is amazing for anybody who works under Fritz Lang. And Reeves was that kind of an actor. And
The idea of watering down a book to get a good movie made certainly applies to the next film I want to put up, which is The Young Lions. Uh, another one of my favorites. I actually got a chance to interview. This is a funny story. I go to Switzerland and the same year I saw Zinnemann. I go to Switzerland. I meet Irwin Shaw, and Irwin,
good
Irwin
writer,
told me that I could not record him and I could not take notes. So it's
a
so
tough guy
essentially,
too. Yeah, I know.
essentially, I had to sit there and listen to him, and I asked him some questions. He became actually very friendly and helped me try to find a publisher for my first book, Combat Films. But it's funny because the first thing he said to me as I walked, we met in a little town in Switzerland named Clusters, where he lived, and he said the first thing he said to me as I sat down, "Who broke your nose?" So I'd actually fallen down on a railroad track when I was 13. But he thought perhaps I had gotten into some fistfights because the whole experience that Monty Clift's character, Noah Ackerman, has in that southern military base of getting beaten up every week was based on his own experience being a Jew in the military in the South. What can you say about the way this book was watered down?
First of all, one of the great shames of the U.S. Army, even at the time of World War II, when we were fighting fascist hatred, was the almost Nazi-like attitude of many in the U.S. Army and other branches, particularly the Army, in which they were racist against blacks, segregated units, and a Jew who couldn't be segregated because of his skin color still had to take guff from a lot of Christian bullies within the platoon. Now they show that for the first time in the Young Lions. I remember Crossfire. Crossfire has the military film. At the time, it was against anti-Semitism, and Robert Ryan's anti-Semitic bigot in the book, written by Richard Brooks, he hates everybody. He hates blacks. He hates Jews. He hates women. He hates Eleanor Roosevelt. He hates everybody. But the thing is that in the movie, you couldn't say that in 1947. RKO did that. Edward Dmytryk directed that. That is, he would direct the Young Lions as well 10 years later. But he couldn't say that under the Breen office in 1947. The military would have had a conniption. So what happened was Kenneth MacDonald, as a military officer, says to a young soldier there, the Army doesn't stand for any anti-Semitism or any kind of bigotry in the unit. And meanwhile, I can imagine Jews out in the audience watching this film who had been in a military unit, like smirking ironically, like Riley. Yeah, sure, right. But they were beaten to within an inches of their lives, And so the thing is that by the time of the Young Lions, this was very real. In the book, his character's not Pruitt. That's From Here to Eternity. In the book, Noah gets his teeth knocked out several times. It's bloody. It's gory. He has 10 Christian bullies to fight with. In the movie, they knock it down to 5. He's 10. They knock it down to 5. And they warded that down considerably also. Lee Van Cleef is supposed to be the Southern sergeant who comes in there and he says the words, Noah, I want this barracks cleaned up and I want it white man clean. And he says that in Irwin Shaw's book, which of course in the movie they changed to, I want it white glove clean. They also remove Van Cleef doesn't have a Southern accent. He's also supposed to lisp, which I'm glad they removed anyway. I don't know why Shaw put that in there.
Well, poor Lee Van Cleef, always played the bad guy. You never saw him as a romantic lead within 20 miles. He was always the bad. The closest he came.
I love Lee Van Cleef.
Oh, he's fabulous. The closest he came to a sympathetic role is he's the guy who takes out the beast from 20,000 Fathoms with that isotope. And he has that classic line where the scientist says, do you know how to use a grenade rifle? And Lee Van Cleef says, pick my teeth with it.
If it could be loaded and fired, I could use it. And this is talking about a man with a major European star in spaghetti westerns.
The similarity between From Here to Eternity and the Young Lions, both officers, the officers' first homes who gets Pruitt beaten up, and then the Herbert Rudley character in Young Lions, right. They both don't get their comeuppance in the movie. In the book, I should say, they both don't get their comeuppance in the book. They actually are promoted and they go into fighting. So they really watered that down. I think particularly in From Here to Eternity, they created that whole scene where Holmes has to appear before the commanding officer that he's going to get demoted. Before we go, let me put up another, because by the way, we're going to have you back to talk about your other books, because we're just talking World War II movies and war pictures today. I got to put up one of my favorites, which you listed, which of course is Patton from 1970. To me, pretty much a perfect movie in so many ways.
Yes.
And I think that the irony is George C. Scott refused to accept the Best Actor Oscar because he didn't believe in award shows. But if ever an actor deserved to be honored, it was for this role. Tell me how you feel about Patton.
Well, first of all, besides the fact that, all right, off screen, Scott could drink, a woman beater, a wife beater, a lot of things, an amazing talent. He really had it. I think he had a certain amount of principle as well. You want a drunk and a wife beater, but as it is, when you think of George S. Patton today, you probably think of George C. Scott. That's how perfect the interpretation was. And in real life, George S. Patton had a high-pitched voice. If you want to look at old things, old films, if you're on YouTube or wherever, documentary film, he has a high-pitched voice. He cursed. Every other word was cursing, which he did to try to be a swaggering tough guy. But the thing is, he had a high-pitched voice, and him cursing sounded very funny. Scott had that gruff, gravelly voice. You imagine that's Patton, but he ain't. Patton, had falsettos. But the thing is that it's a wonderful, wonderful movie. if it were a little more accurate, um, the slapping incident that he did to that poor soldier suffering from combat shock. It was not one incident; it was two. Two. They combined it to one. Um, there were a whole of they cut out his anti-Semitism. He was one of the most violent anti-Semites to head the U.S. Army. After the war, Eisenhower made him basically to run. I forgot
Post-war
what his
Germany?
name. Yeah, wartime Germany. And the thing is that, but he wanted to take former SS, now POWs, former SS people, and move them back into positions of power. These guys were responsible for a lot of the Holocaust. They wanted to move who they survived. They moved them back into positions of power because he's such a violently anti-Semitic person, and he was talented in a way that you could. It was just go forward, go forward, go forward. You needed generals like him. He would have the Third Army steal gasoline from the tanks of other armies. He didn't care as long as his people went. I was an egomaniac. He wanted to be the first one in Berlin, first one in Rome. So did Bernard Montgomery, but that was another story. Despite it being unrealistic as far as war plans were concerned. But the thing about Patton is that he was a go-to guy. You needed someone like that to head the military in World War II. A lot of the generals, admirals, what have you, in World War II, mostly generals, could be very dysfunctional. A lot of them didn't like Jews. A lot of them didn't like black people. A lot of them didn't. But the thing is that they were into power. They were into arrogance. They were into blowing their own horn a great deal, despite they're always fighting with each other over turf wars. You don't see that on the American screen, certainly not during World War II. Only after the war, we were starting to open up on these little turf wars, how dysfunctional generals could be. And there were plenty of. MacArthur was more symbolic of the army rather than as far as being dysfunctional is concerned. Ironically, a lot of these guys are incredibly talented commanders. They can get the job done. One wonders that without some of these dysfunctional people, whether we would have won World War II as well as we did.
I
You know,
once had a chance to interview Abraham Baum, B-A-U-M. He was a captain with the Third Army. His unit was the one that Patton sent to Hammelburg in March 45 to rescue the prisoners of war there. It was going to be a big thing for Patton because Patton was reading about all these things that were happening in the Philippines, rescuing prisoners from the Japanese. So he sent this captain with 54 vehicles and 300 men to rescue the men at Hammelburg. And Baum told me, and this is interesting, he said that Patton liked to put Jews in the lead positions in some of his advanced units because he knew what tenacious fighters they were because they were fighting the Nazis. I don't know if that's overall true, but in Baum's case, his unit was, I don't think it was so much left out to dry, but they ran into much more of an enemy than they thought they would do, and they were all eventually killed, wounded, or captured. And later it was proven that one of the prisoners at Hammelburg was John Knight Waters, who was Patton's son-in-law. So
son-in-law.
Patton was the only time Patton was really criticized about a military operation. Well, listen, Bob, this is great. I mean, we could talk for another hour about all of our favorite movies. We've covered some of them. I also really would like to talk more about some of your other books, particularly your Revolutionary Mexico on screen. Before I go, I have to put up a still, and we'll talk about this movie, I'm sure, when we have you back. But this is my favorite Mexican Revolutionary era movie, which is
Wonderful movie, yes.
The Professionals. Just great. Uh, I can never get enough of Richard Brooks and his marvelous dialogue, and it's just one of my personal favorites. Well, we have been listening and watching Bob Herzberg, who's the author of a book called Hollywood and the Military Bureaucracy, and I really appreciate you coming on today, Bob. And for our listeners and viewers, please, if you like what you're listening to or hearing, please give us a thumbs up or send us a comment. We love hearing from you. Um, I have another podcast called Tales from Hollywoodland, which you're also welcome to listen to, which I co-host with Arthur Friedman and Julian Schlossberg, two fellow producers. That's available on all your podcasts. This one, Saturday Night the Movies, is now available on YouTube, and I'm sure some of you are watching it. And listen, Bob, thank you so much for your time today, and I'm going to have you back, okay?
Great. Thank you, Steve. I loved it. Loved every minute.
I'm your host, Steve Rubin. Our producer's Ben Shrewsbury. We'll see you next week.